The ADHD in Adult Women Blueprint, a complete guide to ADHD symptoms, late diagnosis, anxiety relief, emotional regulation, and focus for neurodivergent women by Emma Holloway. Introduction. In 1980, if you asked a doctor what a person with ADHD looked like, they would describe the same person every time. They would tell you about a 7-year-old boy. He was the kid who couldn't sit still in his chair. He was the one jumping off the playground equipment, shouting out in class without raising his hand, and generally making life difficult for his teachers. Everyone knew that ADHD was a boy problem. It was about being loud, being fast, and being a disruption. That year, a group of experts sat in a room in Washington, D.C., to rewrite the rules of mental health. This book was the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, or the DSM-III. For the first time, these experts admitted something new. They realized that a person could have ADHD without being hyperactive. They acknowledged that inattention, the tendency to drift away, lose track of time, or struggle to focus, was a real part of the condition. It should have been a breakthrough. It should have been the moment millions of girls and women finally got the help they needed. But there was a catch. Even though the experts changed the rules, they kept using the same yardstick. They continued to judge everyone based on how 7-year-old boys acted. Because girls usually weren't jumping on desks or getting into fights, they were ignored. If a girl spent her class time staring out the window or doodling in her notebook, she wasn't seen as having a medical condition. She was just dreamy. She was distracted, or most painfully, she wasn't living up to her potential. This historical mistake created a lost generation. It left millions of women to grow up believing that their struggles were a failure of character rather than a difference in biology. We were looking for a fire, the loud, obvious hyperactivity of boys, but we ignored the slow-burning embers of the female mind. While the boys were being diagnosed and supported, the girls were busy learning how to hide. The invisible struggle. If you are reading this, you likely know exactly what it feels like to hide. You know the exhaustion that comes from pretending everything is fine while your internal world feels like it's spinning out of control. For years, you might have felt like you were running a race where everyone else was wearing sneakers and you were wearing lead boots. You kept up, but the effort it took was 10 times harder than it seemed to be for anyone else. The struggle of the ADHD woman is often an invisible one. It's not found in a loud outburst at a meeting. It's found in the death pile of mail on the kitchen counter that you can't bring yourself to open. It's found in the 3 loads of laundry sitting in the dryer that have been rewashed 4 times because you keep forgetting to move them. It's found in the crushing weight of mom guilt because you forgot it was pajama day at school, or the paralyzing anxiety that hits when your boss sends a message that says, "Can we chat later?" For a long time, you might have called this laziness. You might have told yourself you were messy or unproductive. You looked at other women who seemed to handle careers, kids, and clean homes with ease, and you wondered what secret manual they were given that you missed. You tried every planner, every app, and every life hack on the internet, only to feel like a failure when you stopped using them after 3 days. The truth is much simpler and much kinder. Your brain is not broken. It is simply wired differently for a world that wasn't built for you. A moment in the SUV, the sun is setting over a quiet street in Chicago, casting long shadows across the driveway of a neat 2-story house. Inside a silver SUV, Alina Rodriguez is sitting perfectly still. She isn't checking her phone. She isn't listening to the radio. She is just staring at the texture of the leather on her steering wheel. To anyone walking by, Alina looks like a success story. At 38, she is a senior marketing manager at a high-pressure tech firm. She is creative, witty, and known for her ability to save the day when a project goes off the rails. She is married to Mark, a kind man who tries his best to understand her, and she has 2 beautiful children, Arya and Leo. But inside the SUV, Alina feels like a fraud. Her day at the office was a whirlwind of meetings and emails. She performed her role perfectly. She smiled at the right times, gave a brilliant presentation, and masked the fact that her mind was vibrating with a dozen different thoughts at once. But now that she is home, the mask is starting to crack. The thought of walking through that front door and facing the second shift, the dinner, the bath times, the permission slips, the clutter feels like trying to climb Mount Everest in a blizzard. She stays in the car for 20 minutes. This is her ritual. It's the only place where she doesn't have to be anything for anyone. But even here, the shame follows her. She looks at the empty coffee cups in the cup holder and the pile of dry cleaning in the backseat that has been there for 2 weeks. She thinks about the email from her daughter's teacher she forgot to answer. "Why is this so hard for me?" she whispers to herself. "I can manage $1 million budget at work, but I can't remember to buy milk." As she sits there, she pulls up a podcast she saw mentioned in a group for overwhelmed moms. The host begins to talk about something called executive dysfunction in women. As the words fill the quiet car, Elena feels a sudden, terrifying jolt of recognition. The host isn't talking about hyperactive boys. She is talking about her. She is talking about the paralyzing feeling of having too many choices, the time blindness that makes an hour feel like 5 minutes, and the deep, dark shame of feeling like a failure in your own home. For the first time in her life, Elena isn't looking at a list of her flaws. She is looking at a map of her brain. The promise of the blueprint Elena's story is the story of so many women. It is likely your story, too. But the moment of recognition, the moment you realize that your struggles have a name, is where the healing begins. This book is designed to be your blueprint for a new way of living. We are going to move away from the idea that you need to fix yourself to fit a normal mold. Instead, we are going to look at how to build a life that actually fits you. By the time you finish these pages, you will experience a total transformation. You will move from a state of functional collapse, where you are surviving but drowning in exhaustion, to becoming a brain-first woman. You will learn to trade shame for strategy. You will stop asking, "What is wrong with me?" and start asking, "What does my brain need right now?" Manage the mental load. You will find practical tools to handle the death piles and the deadlines without the crushing weight of guilt. Regulate your emotions. You will understand why your feelings sometimes feel like a storm and how to find your center when rejection-sensitive dysphoria, RSD, hits. Live Unmasked. You will find a roadmap to stop performing for others and start living authentically, saving your energy for the things that actually matter to you. Build your external hard drive. Since the ADHD brain often struggles with internal organization, you will learn how to set up your environment to do the heavy lifting for you. This isn't about curing your ADHD. It's about understanding your unique neurobiology so well that you can stop fighting against it and start working with it. Why this approach works, you might be skeptical. You've probably tried self-help books before. You might have a shelf full of them that you've only read the first chapter of. That is okay. In fact, that is very ADHD. The reason this blueprint is different is that it isn't based on the willpower model of success. Most advice for productivity is written for people who have a linear brain, people who can see a task, plan a task, and do a task without their brain's internal secretary going on strike. This book is built on the work of pioneers like Sari Solden, who was one of the first to realize that women's ADHD is a unique experience. It is backed by modern science that explains why your brain craves dopamine and why boring tasks feel physically painful. We will look at the lives of brilliant women like Nellie Bly and Hedy Lamarr, who used their intense, nonlinear minds to change the world. We aren't going to try to turn you into a neurotypical person. That would be a waste of your brilliance. We are going to give you the tools to be a thriving, successful, neurodivergent woman. The journey ahead, as we follow Elena through her journey of discovery, we will walk through the specific stages of the ADHD experience. We will start by looking at the mask, the social performance you've been putting on for years, and why it eventually starts to crack. We will dive into the science of why women's symptoms are so often missed and how to identify the internalized hyperactivity that keeps your mind racing even when your body is still. We will talk about the broken secretary in your brain, the executive functions that manage your time and memory, and how to build systems that support them. We will tackle the emotional side of ADHD, including the shame spiral and the intense pain of perceived rejection. You will find a tactical guide to organizing your home and workspace in a way that provides dopamine hits rather than sensory overload. You will even navigate the complex world of your career, helping you decide when to speak up about your needs and how to find your zone of genius. Finally, we will address the grief. Many women who are diagnosed late in life feel a sense of sadness for the girl they used to be, the one who thought she was bad or stupid. We will walk through that grief together and move toward a life of radical authenticity. Elena is still sitting in her car, but she isn't staring at the steering wheel anymore. She is looking at the front door of her house with a new sense of curiosity. She doesn't have all the answers yet, but for the first time, she has a clue. She knows she isn't a failure. She is just a woman with a very specific kind of brain, and she is ready to learn how to use it. Your journey starts here. Let's begin. Chapter 1: The Day the Mask Cracked. The book on the shelf is not particularly thick. It has a plain cover, the kind you might find in a dusty corner of a university library. The paper is slightly yellowed now, and the spine has a few white creases from being opened and closed hundreds of times. To a stranger, it looks like just another self-help book from the mid-1990s. But for thousands of women, this object was the first time they ever saw their own faces clearly. Before this book existed, the medical world had a very specific image of a certain condition. They pictured a young boy, perhaps 7 or 8 years old, who could not sit still in his wooden school chair. They saw a child who climbed on top of cabinets or ran into the street without looking. They called it ADHD, and they were convinced it was a boy thing. In 1995, in a quiet office in Ann Arbor, Michigan, a therapist named Sari Solden realized the doctors were looking at the wrong map. She sat across from women who were brilliant, kind, and hardworking, yet they were drowning. These women didn't climb on cabinets. They didn't disrupt class. Instead, they sat very still. They smiled. They nodded. And inside, their minds were screaming with the effort of trying to keep up. Sari saw that these women were wearing a heavy, invisible costume. She called it the mask of competence. When she published Women with Attention Deficit Disorder, she wasn't just writing a book. She was handing a sledgehammer to every woman who was tired of pretending. She was telling them that the struggle they felt wasn't a character flaw. It was a biological reality that had been ignored because it didn't look like a little boy jumping off a desk. The face in the mirror. For most of her life, Elena Rodriguez believed she was a master of disguise. As she sat in a high-stakes board meeting at her tech firm in Chicago, she looked exactly like the woman she was supposed to be. Her blazer was steamed and crisp. Her hair was pulled back into a sleek, professional bun. She had a leather-bound notebook open in front of her, filled with neat, color-coded tabs. To her boss and her team, Elena was the reliable one. She was the senior marketing manager who never missed a detail. But as the meeting stretched into its second hour, a small, black fly began to buzz near the window. Elena's brain glitched. The sound of the fly became louder than the vice president's voice. She found herself counting the number of times the fly hit the glass. 1, 2, 3. She tried to pull her eyes back to the spreadsheet on the screen, but her mind felt like a radio dial being turned rapidly between stations. She was losing the thread of the conversation. She felt a cold prickle of sweat under her arms. She knew this feeling well. It was the feeling of the glass mirror starting to vibrate. For years, Elena had lived behind this mirror. When people looked at her, they saw a successful professional and a dedicated mother. They saw the reflection Elena wanted them to see, the normal one. But behind that glass, Elena was shattered. She was constantly picking up the pieces of her own focus, trying to glue them back together before anyone noticed the cracks. "Elena, what do you think about the Q3 projections?" The vice president was looking at her. The room went silent. Elena's heart hammered against her ribs. She had no idea what the last 5 minutes of the meeting were about. She looked down at her color-coded notebook. It was empty. She had been so busy trying to look like she was listening that she had forgotten to actually listen. "I think we need to look closer at the engagement metrics before we commit," she said, using a generic phrase she had practiced for moments just like this. It worked. The meeting moved on. But as Elena walked back to her office, she felt sick. The mask was getting heavier every day. It wasn't just a costume anymore, it was a cage. She was 38 years old, and she was terrified that today was the day the glass would finally shatter. The myth of the naughty boy, the reason so many women like Elena reach their 30s or 40s before realizing they have ADHD, is because of a very old, very stubborn myth. For decades, the medical community believed that ADHD was defined by externalized behavior. This is the idea that if a brain is struggling with focus or impulse control, it will always show up as physical movement or disruption. Because girls are often socialized to be people pleasers, their symptoms don't usually leak out as bad behavior. Instead, they leak inward. While the boy with ADHD is running around the room, the girl with ADHD is sitting at her desk, staring out the window, dreaming of 1,000 different worlds. She isn't being naughty, so no one thinks to help her. Society tells us that a good girl is quiet, organized, and helpful. When a girl feels her mind racing or her focus slipping, she doesn't demand attention. She hides it. She learns to watch the other girls to see how they sit, how they organize their backpacks, and how they talk. She copies them. This is the birth of the mask. Many people believe that if a woman is smart enough to get a degree, hold a job, or raise a family, she couldn't possibly have ADHD. They think ADHD is a learning disability that makes you unable to succeed. But the truth is actually the opposite. Many women with ADHD are incredibly high-achieving. They use their intelligence to build complex systems to hide their struggles. They use perfectionism as a shield. If everything looks perfect on the outside, they think, no one will find out that I forgot to pay the electric bill 3 times this year. If I stay at work until 8:00 p.m. to finish a task that takes others 2 hours, no one will know my brain glitched for the entire afternoon. This is the high cost of the mask. It takes an incredible amount of energy to perform neurotypicality. It is like running a marathon every single day while pretending you are just taking a light stroll. Eventually, the runner gets tired. Eventually, the runner collapses. The weight of the performance. When Sari Solden started her work, she noticed a pattern. Her female clients weren't coming to her because they thought they had ADHD. They were coming to her because they were exhausted. They felt like frauds. They were suffering from what researchers now call social camouflaging. Think about a chameleon. It changes its color to match its environment so it can stay safe. It doesn't do this for fun, it does it to survive. Women with ADHD do the same thing. They change their personality, their tone of voice, and their habits to match what they think normal women do. This camouflaging shows up in small, daily choices, over-preparing for simple conversations so you don't say the wrong thing, forcing yourself to sit perfectly still even when your legs feel like they are filled with buzzing bees, checking your purse 10 times to make sure your keys are there because you don't trust your own memory, smiling and nodding during a meeting when you have completely lost the plot. The problem with being a chameleon is that you eventually forget what your original color was. You spend so much time being the person everyone else expects that your own needs and your own identity get buried under the performance. This is why many women experience a masking collapse during major life transitions. For Alina, it happened when she got promoted to senior manager while her children were still young. Before the promotion, she could use her evenings to catch up on work. But now, her children needed her in the evenings. The domestic load of laundry, school forms, and meal planning collided with the professional load of deadlines and leadership. She no longer had the extra hours needed to maintain the mask. There wasn't enough time in the day to pretend to be perfect anymore. This is the moment when the invisible struggle becomes very visible. It usually happens in the 30s or 40s, often as hormones shift or responsibilities grow. The systems that worked in your 20s, staying up all night, drinking too much caffeine, or sheer willpower, simply stop working. Identifying your own mask to move forward, you have to be willing to look at the mask and call it what it is. It is not your personality. It is a survival strategy, and while it may have kept you safe for a long time, it is now the very thing keeping you from getting the help you deserve. You might be masking if you feel like you are two different people. There is the public you, who is capable and put together, and the private you, who feels like a mess. You might feel a deep sense of shame when people compliment you because you feel like you are tricking them. You think if they could see my doom pile of mail on the kitchen counter, they wouldn't think I was successful. We can begin to audit this mask by asking ourselves some difficult questions. This isn't about judging yourself. It's about being an investigator of your own life. The energy drain, do you feel brain dead or completely depleted after a social event or a day at the office, even if nothing bad happened? The scripting, do you practice what you are going to say in your head for hours before a phone call or a meeting? The mirroring, do you find yourself adopting the hobbies, speaking styles, or habits of the people around you just to fit in? The shame of the unseen, do you hide parts of your life like a messy car, a cluttered closet, or missed deadlines because you believe they reveal your true, lazy self? When Alina started her own audit, she realized that she sat in her SUV for 20 minutes every day after work before going inside. She wasn't checking her phone or listening to music. She was just sitting in the dark, trying to reset her brain. She needed that time to take off the professional Alina mask and put on the mom Alina mask. She realized she was living her life in the transitions between characters, never actually being herself. The transition trigger, one of the most common myths about ADHD, is that you either have it or you don't, and it stays exactly the same forever. But for women, ADHD is often a moving target. Our symptoms are deeply tied to our environment and our biology. In the 1990s, the medical world didn't understand how estrogen affects the brain. We now know that when estrogen levels drop, such as during the week before a period, after having a baby, or during perimenopause, ADHD symptoms often get much worse. This is because estrogen helps the brain produce dopamine, the very chemical that people with ADHD are already low on. This is why many women feel like they are losing their minds in their late 30s. It's not just that life is getting busier, it's that their brain chemistry is changing. The mask that was once held up by a steady stream of hormones and youthful energy starts to slip. For Alina, the trigger was the Spirit Week incident. She had handled big product launches and million-dollar budgets. But when she forgot that it was Superhero Day at her son's school, she broke down. Seeing her son's face as the only kid without a costume felt like a final verdict on her worth. She wasn't just a woman who forgot a shirt. She was a failure as a mother. This is the disproportionate reaction that Sari Solden wrote about. When the mask cracks, we don't just feel annoyed. We feel a level of shame that is completely out of proportion to the event. We feel this way because we aren't just reacting to a forgotten costume. We are reacting to the terrifying thought that our secret is finally out. We are reacting to the collapse of the glass mirror. Breaking the mirror, the goal of this journey isn't to fix your brain so that the mask fits better. The goal is to take the mask off entirely. Taking off the mask is terrifying. It means letting people see the doom piles. It means admitting that you can't just do certain things that seem easy for others. It means being the woman who needs noise-canceling headphones in the office or the woman who uses paper plates because she can't handle the dishes this week. But there is something beautiful on the other side of that fear. When you stop trying to be normal, you finally have the energy to be yourself. Sari Solden's work didn't just give women a diagnosis, it gave them permission. It told them that they were allowed to occupy space in the world, even if they weren't perfectly organized. It told them that their creativity, their empathy, and their unique way of seeing the world were valuable, perhaps even more valuable than a clean kitchen or a neat notebook. If you are reading this and feeling a jolt of recognition, as Alina did in her SUV, know that the cracking of the mask is actually a good thing. It is the first step toward freedom. You cannot heal a person you are pretending to be. You can only heal the person you actually are. The path to an unmasked life, imagine waking up and not feeling like you have to prepare for the day. Imagine a world where you don't judge yourself for the way your brain works, but instead, you build a life that supports it. This is what is possible for you, self-advocacy. You will learn to say, my brain works differently and this is what I need to succeed, without feeling like you are asking for a favor. Authentic connection, you will find neurokin, other women who understand exactly what it's like to have a butterfly brain, and you will realize you were never alone. Precision regulation, you will learn to spot an emotional storm before it hits and use tools to stay grounded, rather than just powering through. Creative freedom, when you stop using all your dopamine to hide your struggles, you can start using it to fuel your passions. The glass mirror is vibrating for a reason. It is ready to break so that you can finally step through it. You are not a broken version of a normal woman. You are a neurodivergent woman who has been trying to survive in a world that wasn't built for you. The first step is simply to stop. Stop running. Stop pretending. Stop apologizing for the way your mind is wired. Look at the cracks in the glass, and instead of trying to tape them over, let the light shine through. The mask has served its purpose. It kept you safe when you didn't have a name for your struggle. But now, you have the map. You have the blueprint. And you are ready to see what happens when you finally show the world your real face. Chapter 2. Why do women's symptoms go unseen? On the morning of November 14, 1889, Nellie Bly woke up in her New York apartment and prepared for a Tuesday that looked exactly like every other Tuesday. She was 25 years old, a star reporter for the New York World, and she was restless. She didn't know that by noon, her entire life would become a race against time. She didn't know that her name would soon be shouted on street corners across the globe. She just knew that she had an idea, an intense idea, the kind that feels like a fire in the chest, and she couldn't let it go. A year earlier, Nellie had suggested a wild plan to her editor. She wanted to see if she could beat the fictional record of Phileas Fogg, the hero of the book Around the World in 80 Days. Her editor had laughed. He told her it was impossible for a woman to travel alone. She would need a dozen trunks of clothes. She would need a protector. She would get lost or overwhelmed. Nellie didn't argue, she just waited. When the editor finally agreed, he gave her almost no warning. He told her she was leaving in 2 days. Most people would have panicked. They would have spent weeks making lists and packing heavy suitcases. But Nellie's brain worked differently. When a task was boring, like sitting through a long meeting, she might seem distant. But when a task was thrilling, she became a force of nature. She packed everything she needed for a trip around the globe into one small leather bag. She wore one sturdy dress. She didn't bring a protector. She brought her own sharp mind and a singular, burning focus. As she stepped onto the steamship Augusta Victoria, the world expected her to fail because she was a woman. They expected her to be fragile or easily distracted. Instead, she navigated stormy seas, missed train connections, and strange lands with a level of mental clarity that bordered on the supernatural. She wasn't just traveling, she was hyper-focused. The power of the interest-based brain. Nellie Bly finished her trip in 72 days, 6 hours, and 11 minutes. She beat the fictional record and the expectations of every man in New York. While the world saw a plucky reporter, what they were actually seeing was the ADHD brain in its most powerful state. For a woman with ADHD, the brain does not operate on a priority system. It operates on an interest system. A neurotypical brain can look at a pile of laundry and a looming work deadline and say, "The deadline is more important, so I will do that first." The ADHD brain looks at those same two things and asks, which one gives me the most dopamine right now? If the work deadline is boring and the laundry is also boring, the brain might choose a third option, researching the history of 18th century button making for 4 hours. This isn't laziness. It is a biological drive. When Nellie Bly was on that ship, her brain was flooded with interest. The high stakes, the novelty of the travel, and the constant problem-solving acted like fuel. This is often why ADHD in women goes unseen for so long. Because women are socialized to be helpers and organizers, they often find ways to force themselves through the boring stuff using pure anxiety. They use the fire of a looming deadline to jumpstart their brain. But when they find something they truly love, they don't just do the hobby. They become the hobby. They disappear into it for hours, forgetting to eat, drink, or sleep. The quiet girl in the back row, while Nellie Bly was racing across oceans, millions of other girls were sitting in classrooms being told they were spacey or daydreamers. To understand why your symptoms might have been missed, we have to look back at the history of how doctors defined ADHD. For nearly a century, ADHD was seen as a little boy problem. In the early 1900s, doctors called it moral defect. By the 1960s, it was minimal brain dysfunction. In all these stages, the focus was on the external behavior. Doctors looked for the child who couldn't sit still, the boy who threw his pencil or ran across the room. Because boys are often encouraged to be loud and active, their ADHD was easy to spot. It was externalized. Girls, however, are taught from a very young age to be good. They are taught to be quiet, polite, and helpful. When a girl's brain is racing at 100 miles per hour, she doesn't usually jump on her desk. Instead, she turns that energy inward. She stares out the window and imagines a whole other world. She doodles in the margins of her notebook. She becomes the quiet girl who seems a bit distracted but isn't causing a scene. Because she isn't a problem for the teacher, she isn't referred for help. She is simply labeled as shy or not living up to her potential. This creates a lost generation of women who grew up believing they were just a little bit slow or a little bit weird, never realizing their brain was actually working overtime just to stay in the chair. Elena's midnight garden. It is 11:15 p.m. in Chicago. The house is finally quiet. Elena Rodriguez is sitting at her kitchen table, the glow of her laptop screen reflecting in her tired eyes. Her husband, Mark, and the kids have been asleep for over an hour. In the sink, the dishes from dinner are still crusty and piled high. There is a permission slip for her daughter Arya's field trip sitting on the counter, still unsigned. Elena knows these things are there. She can feel the weight of them in the back of her mind, but she can't move toward them. Instead, Elena has spent the last 3 hours researching heirloom tomatoes. She has 14 tabs open. She knows which soil pH is best for a Cherokee purple tomato. She has mapped out a garden bed in a notebook, even though she doesn't actually have a garden yet. She feels electrified. Her heart is racing and her mind is sharp. She feels more alive than she did all day at her high-pressure marketing job, but underneath the excitement, there is a cold, sharp blade of guilt. Why am I like this, she thinks. I have a huge presentation tomorrow. The kitchen is a mess. I'm exhausted. Why am I reading about